Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel. If you are new here, I hope you're all doing so well. Welcome back to another episode of True Crime and Makeup. Today I do have another Scottish case for you, right? I'm sorry, but this one was too good and I have to give full credit to my dad. He has been telling me to do this for the longest time, and since you're enjoying the Scottish cases, I thought I would do this one, make it the last Scottish one for a little while, just so we can get, you know, other places in there as well. But it is a case of Burke and Hare. They were two of the most notorious serial killers and grave robbers in history. Like, they would dig up freshly buried corpses to sell to like surgeons and anatomists to dissect in lectures at university theatres. However, the demand for corpses was so high that Burke and Hare took it upon themselves to go on a murder spree and murder a total of 16 innocent people just to sell their corpses to medical professionals to receive like £8 or £10 a time. How is that worth it? I mean, maybe back in this time, because we're going back to the 1800s, right? Maybe in this time, that was a lot of money. Still doesn't make it right, but maybe the money was better. Now, if you like true crime and makeup, you should definitely subscribe to my channel. Put the notification bell on so you don't miss when I upload. It is 2 to 3 times per week. I would love if you could also leave a like and a comment if you enjoyed the video. If you want details of what I've used on my face today, they will be linked down below in the description box, alongside my social media handles, my TikTok and Instagram, which you can follow if you want, but ultimately, just make sure you subscribe to the channel. Any case suggestions can also be left down below, or you can send them to me via email, which I'll pop up on the screen now for you. But without any further rambling and any further ado, let's get into the crazy case of Burke and Hare. So for you to understand Burke and Hare's story, it is important to give a very brief rundown of the bloody history of medicine. So beginning in 1506, Scottish surgeons had obtained the legal right to dissect bodies of condemned criminals who had just been cut down from the gallows, like from hanging, or they could also use suicide victims, foundlings or orphans for their dissection. So the demand for bodies did get a bit overwhelming in time. Like, everyone was wanting these condemned criminals or orphans or suicide victims to dissect. So the demand was overwhelming, and surgeons and anatomists, they started to turn to some unsavoury people, shall we say. Body snatchers, grave robbers, resurrectionists, resurrection men, they would turn to them to grave rob bodies. Do you remember when the egg was like the most liked picture in the history of Instagram? That was my selfie. That was me right now. Look at me. I'm an egg. So these grave robbers and body snatchers, they would dig up freshly buried corpses and then take them to medical schools and sell the corpses for what they believed was like a good profit. But let me tell you, right? Spoiler alert, you could buy a body for £8. In this day and age, I'm guessing back then it was a lot of money, but if someone offered me that now, I'd be like, absolutely not. And what the body snatchers would also do is, when they've dug up the freshly buried corpses, if they had any like jewellery or anything that looked expensive, they would take that as well so they could pawn it off and get more money. Now, the price per corpse would change depending on the season. So in summer, you could get like £8, you know, a little profit. £8 because the heat would force the bodies to decompose quicker, whereas in the winter the demand for corpses was much higher, so you would get a hefty £10. Yeah. And the demand for the corpses in winter was much higher because the bodies stayed fresher longer and more dissections took place because they were wanting the cold bodies. Now, an extremely important player in this case is Robert Knox. He was an anatomist who had qualified as a doctor in 1814. Now, he had worked as an army physician throughout quite a few wars, so he travelled all around before then settling in his hometown of Edinburgh, Scotland. And this was around 1820 that he settled back in Scotland. In 1825, he went on to become a fellow of the Royal College of Surgeons in Edinburgh. And at the college, he lectured on anatomy. And a big selling point for his lectures was the fact that he would always perform live dissections. So he was one of these people that need, a fresh corpse. And he did state that it would only be the freshest of corpses that he would dissect on during his lectures. That was a real selling point. That was his moneymaker. Now, as I was saying, he was promising that he would have a fresh corpse for every dissection. Now, Robert Knox was performing up to 2 live dissections a day. His demand for fresh bodies was through the roof. He needed the bodies. So moving on to William Burke. William Burke was born in 1792 in Urney, County Tyrone in Ireland. He was one of 2 sons to a middle-class family. Now, Burke, along with his brother Constantine, they had quite a comfortable upbringing. There was no real struggle. They both went on to join the British Army when they were teenagers. So Burke served in Donegal Militia until he eventually met and married a woman in County Mayo, which is where he and his wife would end up settling. Now, the marriage ended in 1818 after quite a heavy argument with his father-in-law regarding land ownership, and he was like, do you know what? I'm out of here. He left his wife, he left her family, he took off and he moved to Scotland. In Scotland he became a labourer and he lived in Falkirk, which can I just say is like a stone's throw away from me. Like, I could drive 15 minutes and I'm in Falkirk. It's close by. Now, in the small village of Madison Falkirk, he would live with a woman called Helen McDougall, who is quite a crucial part in this story. In November of 1827, Burke and Helen would move to Tanner's Close in Edinburgh. Both of them went on to become hawkers and they were selling basically old clothes to impoverished families and impoverished people. So Burke then became a tanner and he was considered to be quite successful. I mean, he was earning up to £1 per week. £1 considered successful. These days you have to be making the hundreds of thousands to be successful, apparently. Now, Burke was known to be a very well-humoured man and he would often entertain his clients by singing and dancing on their doorstep for them whilst he was performing his trade. So what does a cobbler do? Fix shoes? Yeah, I think they, or make shoes? Whatever, he was entertaining them. Now, Burke was raised as a Roman Catholic and he would go on to become a regular at the Presbyterian Church in the Grassmarket in Edinburgh. Now, annoyingly, not much is actually known about William Hare. Not even his date of birth is known either, which is so annoying. When he was arrested in 1828, he did give his age as 21. But it is thought that he was born between 1792 and 1804. Who knows? I don't know. Unless we see his birth certificate, I've honestly not got a clue. No one's ever confirmed it. So Hare worked on the Union Canal for about 7 years before then deciding to move to Edinburgh in the mid-1820s. Now, when he moved to Edinburgh, he would work as a coalman's assistant. And honestly, when people described Hare, there was not much good, if any, to say about him. People said that Hare was illiterate, uncouth, a lean, quarrelsome and immoral character. And it was said that he had scars from old wounds around his head and his eyebrows. So he looked dangerous, a bad boy. So in 1827, Burke and Helen McDougall, they had went to Pennycook in Midlothian where they were going to work on a harvest. And it was whilst they were working on this harvest that they would meet William Hare. Now, Burke and Hare, they had it off from the get-go. They were very compatible as friends and very quickly became best friends to the point that when Helen and Burke moved back to Edinburgh, they moved into Hare's Tanner's Close lodging house. Why was that such a mouthful? But they moved in with them, so roomies. And when they moved into this lodging house is when the couples would become known for their heavy drinking and also their bad behaviour. I can't help but feel like Burke's been led down a bad path, but also he's a grown man, so So, on November the 29th, 1827, one of the lodgers in Hare's lodging house, Donald, he died of dropsy, which these days I think we would refer to as oedema. Is that right? Oedema? Not sure, but they called it dropsy back then. So he passed away just before receiving his quarterly pension. Now, he owed Hare £4 in rent. £4. £4 behind in his rent. He owed it to Hare, and then he passes away. So when they find Donald dead, Hare's like, God damn it, man. He owes me £4. He's just died before paying my rent money back. I am not happy. So Burke and Hare are like, well, listen, if he's like done you out of money, we could sell his body to one of the anatomists, you know, and get some money ourselves. So a carpenter provided a coffin for Donald, and the burial was going to be paid by the local parish. However, Burke and Hare, they had their plans. Now, after this carpenter left, Burke and Hare reopened the coffin, they took out Donald's body and they hid him under the bed. They then filled the coffin up with like bark, dirt, debris, just to like make it feel like, you know, there's a body in there. They then resealed it, and then the coffin was picked up for burial throughout the night, and then Burke and Hare took Donald's body to Edinburgh University to find a purchaser for this fresh cadaver. So Burke and Hare were sent off to Knox's premises in Surgeon Square, and at this point they're dealing with like Knox's juniors, like his assistants and stuff like that. So talking about the price, etc. was briefly discussed with the juniors, but they would arrive at a fixed price with Knox himself. Now, for the body, Knox offered them £7, 10 shillings. Yep, we're in shillings era, baby, and I don't even know like what a shilling is or what that equates to. I don't know. I don't know. Do you know? So at this point, the money has exchanged hands. Donald's body has been handed over to Knox. So Hare receives £4, 5 shillings, and Burke receives, quick math, £3, 5 shillings. That should not have took me so long. That is disgraceful. Now, the reason that Hare got more was to cover off Donald's unpaid rent, because he bloody passed away before he could pay it. And at this point in time, because, you know, Burke felt for Hare like his business was losing out, he was quite happy to give him the bigger share for now. Now, in one of Burke's later confessions, he said that Knox had told them that the anatomists would be glad to see them again. They would be glad to continue doing business with him. So Burke and Hare are sort of thinking like, you know, if we can find these fresh bodies, like, we could make a pretty penny. So they said that they would be on the lookout for any fresh cadavers that would be useful for Knox, and Knox couldn't wait to see them again. Now, I will say the exact order of Burke and Hare's victims remains like a mystery. No one really knows. However, what I will do is detail the murders as per Burke's confession. And let's just hope the guy was telling like a bit of the truth, you know? So most sources would agree that the first murder occurred in either January or February of 1928, and this was a murder of a mill operator by the name of Joseph. Now, Joseph was lodging in Hare's lodging house when a pillow was used to smother him to death. Now, it was said that Burke and Hare were much more inclined to kill Joseph when they discovered that he had a fever and was like really, really unwell. Now, apparently his fever was so severe that he was becoming delirious, so it's like the perfect victim of opportunity in their eyes. Now, apparently both Hare and Hare's wife were like, God damn it, if we keep this sick guy in our house, that's going to be really bad and damaging for our business. Because the wives were complicit. They were not innocent bystanders, no matter how they tried to paint that little portrait. No, they were complicit in these murders. So Burke and Hare provided this man Joseph with some whiskey, enough so he would kind of, you know, relax, feel a bit tipsy. He's already delirious, so again, this is going to happen really quick. So Hare proceeds to suffocate Joseph whilst Burke lay over his torso, like pressing down so he was unable to move. Now, once Joseph was murdered, they then took his body to Knox, who paid £10 this time. Things are really starting to look up. Call them millionaires. Now, what's crazy about this as well is at this point, the way that they murdered Joseph and their other victims was deemed to be like ingenious for the time, because due to the lack of forensics, like there was no modern forensics at this time, the method of murdering was pretty much undetectable. went unnoticed completely. So the next victims were said to be Abigail Simpson and also an unnamed English male. Now, I'm really sorry because I hate like not having names, dates of birth, stuff like that. It really bothers me, so I do apologise, but they were the next known victims. Abigail was a pensioner who was just trying to earn some extra money on top of her pension and selling salt. And she was just visiting Edinburgh for a period of time. She was actually from a nearby place called Gilmerton. On the 12th of February 1828, now I should say this is the only exact date that Burke ever gave in his confession, like this is one that he remembered. So Abigail had been invited back to Hare's lodging house apparently to have a drink. But what Burke and Hare did was they both made sure that Abigail was plied with so much drink that she would be drunk enough to be unable to return home, like she'd have to stay the night. Now when she was drunk enough, Burke and Hare, they attacked her in their usual fashion, you know, smothering, laying over the body so she can't move, and they then put her body in a tea box to be transported over to Knox and be sold. Did I say tea box? I meant tea chest. My apologies, I don't think anyone's fitting in a tea box. So the unnamed Englishman was like a traveller who was selling matches and Tinder, not Tinder the app, like he's not selling Tinder dates. I think Tinder's something to do with like fires, like maybe firewood or something like that. He's a travelling salesman, so he is obviously needing a place to stay, so he books into Hare's lodging house, and unfortunately he falls ill with jaundice. Now, Hare and Hare's wife do not like ill people at their lodging house because it might divert business. So what are they going to do with them? They're going to kill them, of course. So as always, they proceeded with their usual methods of murdering. The reason for the murder, as told, was the worry about their business being avoided because they had ill people lodging there. Makes sense. Now, they would take the body of Abigail Simpson and also the unnamed Englishman to Knox, and he would provide £10 for each body, and it was said that Knox was very happy with the freshness of Abigail's body. Now, it was in either February or March of that very same year where a woman was invited to the house by Margaret Hare, Hare's wife. Now, Margaret provided that old woman with enough whiskey to make her pass out and fall asleep. In the afternoon, Hare returns home and he sees this woman lying on the sofa. Fresh meat. And when he sees this woman, it's almost like the dollar signs like flash up in his eyes and he is excited. Now, he covers her nose and her mouth with a stiff mattress cover and then just left her there to suffocate, I suppose. And it said that she was dead by nightfall, and Burke came and met up with Hare to do their usual, transport the body to Knox. But when Knox got this body, again he was happy with the freshness of it. He paid another £10 for this body. Then in early April, Burke had met two women. One of them was Mary Patterson and the other one was Janet Brown, and they had met in the Canongate area of Edinburgh. Now, Burke's only got one plan for these poor women. So Burke invites both of these ladies back to the lodging and invites them for breakfast. So the three of them left the tavern with 2 bottles of whiskey, but instead of going back to Hare's, they went back to his brother's house. You know, remember Constantine from the start? They go back there. So after his brother Constantine had left for work, they ended up finishing the 2 bottles of whiskey. Now, Mary Patterson had fallen asleep at the table, so you know, Burke and Janet Brown, they continue having a chat. Now, Burke and Janet are talking when Helen McDougall storms in, like our blood absolutely boiling, and she accuses both of them of having an affair. And Burke's like, sweetie, like this is business, darling, like, you know? But she's freaking out. So this breaks out into like a full-blown argument in front of Janet and Mary, who's sleeping at the table still. And Burke ends up throwing a glass at Helen McDougall, which winds up cutting her eye. So Janet Brown ends up stating that she didn't know that Burke was married, and she winds up leaving. And Burke's raging. He's like, there's a perfectly good body just walked out the door. Thanks for that, Helen. Thanks a lot. So Mary is still sleeping at the table. So after this whole like blow up, Helen's then like, right, do you know what, I'll go fetch Hare and Margaret. We'll get the wife and husband involved. So Hare and Margaret arrive shortly after. Then both Burke and Hare decide to lock their wives out of the room, and they proceed to murder Mary Patterson in her sleep. the same way they always do. So they go ahead, they take Mary's body to Robert Knox, who pays them £8. She must not have been as fresh as like Abigail and stuff. She must not have been as fresh as like the other bodies, but I don't really know how it works. I've never, myself, I've never dealt with cadavers, so I don't know. Now, it's when they drop off Mary Patterson that one of Knox's assistants kind of question them. He's like, where did you find her? Because I recognise her, like I feel like I know her. Now Burke and Hare kind of look at each other like, oops. But what they end up saying is that this woman had drank herself to death and that they had purchased her off another woman. So like, okay. Now, Janet Brown, who had left, she's later searching for a friend and she is told that she had left for Glasgow with a travelling salesman. Did she though? At some point in early to mid 1828, an older woman by the name of Mrs. Haldane ended up lodging at Hare's lodging house. Now, after she became drunk, she wound up falling asleep in the stable. She was then, of course, smothered by Burke and Hare, and then her body went on to be sold to Knox. What's really awful about this as well is Mrs. Haldane's daughter would lodge at Hare's residence several months later, and they did the exact same to her. She had fell asleep, killed her, sold her body to Knox and received £8. Then in May of 1828, an older woman had joined the lodging house, and of course when she was intoxicated, Burke had smothered her to death. Then her body was sold to Knox for £10. After the murder of this older woman came the murder of a woman named Effie. Now Effie was someone who was known to Burke. She would sell him scraps of leather when he was working as a cobbler. Now Burke would tempt her into the stable, and it was said that he would tempt the woman in with whiskey, and once she had drunk enough whiskey to be completely intoxicated, both Burke and Hare killed her, and again Knox gave them £10 for Effie's body. The other victim was found by Burke, who was unable to stand because they were so intoxicated, and a local constable was helping this woman get home, but Burke, playing like this friendly citizen, was like, oh, do you know what, don't worry about it, give her to me, I'll take her home, make sure she gets home safe. And the constable allows this to happen. He allows this strange man to take her home. Now, of course, he didn't take this woman home. He took her right back home to Hare's house, where they both killed her and took her body to Knox for £10. Burke and Hare had murdered another 2 lodgers in June, and they just referred to these lodgers as the old woman and the dumb boy. So disrespectful. I mean, I know they're killing, so they're not respectful at all, but I don't know. I'm just getting annoyed. So the dumb boy, as they referred to him, was this woman's grandson. And Burke had said that the murder of this young boy really took a toll on him. Like, apparently the expression of the young boy's face as he died really haunted Burke. But as per, they took the bodies to Knox and received £8 for each of them. Now, on the 24th of June, Burke and Helen McDougall had left Edinburgh to go and visit her family in Falkirk. Now, when they had left, Hare was complaining. He had like no spare money / no money at all. And he also really needed some new clothes, but he couldn't afford them. Now, that's when the couple go away. The couple then return, and Hare is dolled up to the nines. He's got a new outfit on and seems to have some spare cash lying in his pockets. So where did he get this? Now, obviously, Burke was immediately suspicious and asks Hare where he got the extra money and like how did he get his new rig out. And Hare denied killing anyone else and taking the body to Knox. However, Burke just made a quick visit to Knox, who confirmed that yes, Hare had brought in a body and he paid Hare £8 for the body. So Burke goes to confront Hare about this and he's like, you're a liar. You are a dirty liar. You killed someone without me and you took him to Knox and you got my money. And then it leads into this huge argument. Both of them come to blows and it gets so severe that Helen and Burke, they wind up moving in with Burke's cousin, who only lives 2 streets away, right? But they move out. It's very dramatic. Now, the fight between them, it didn't last that long, right? Like, the dream team wanted to be back together, so they eventually make up. In late September / early October, Hare is visiting Burke when an older woman by the name of Mrs. Ostler comes over. Now, she came over to the property to do some laundry, and both Burke and Hare, they wind up getting her really drunk, and of course, they killed her. That very afternoon, Burke and Hare had taken her corpse to Knox, who paid them £8 for Mrs. Ostler's body. Now, a week later, one of Helen's relatives, Anne McDougall, was visiting them. She had came over from Falkirk to visit. Burke and Hare killed her as well and then sold her body and got £10. Like, a relative. Nobody's safe. And the thing is, Helen and Margaret, they knew what their husbands were doing. So, like, I am under no illusions that Helen 100% knew that they were going to kill a relative. Now, Burke and Hare's next victim would actually be an 18-year-old boy who was a very familiar figure around the streets of Edinburgh. This boy was James Wilson. Like I said, he was 18 years old and he had a very, very distinct limp that people knew him for. Now, this young boy was mentally disabled and was described as completely inoffensive. You know, he was nice to everyone. People only said nice things about him. Now, James, also known as Jamie, he lived on the streets and would support himself by begging. Then in November, Hare would lure Jamie back to his lodging house, saying that he can come in, they can have like a drink of whiskey and just like have a chat with each other. So Jamie went. So the two murderers led Jamie Wilson into the bedroom and Margaret Hare shut the door behind them and locked it. Told you, complicit. Jamie Wilson wasn't really into like excess drinking and he much rathered snuff. Now, snuff is like this little tub and it has stuff in it that you can sniff and I think it gives you like a head buzz. I don't know if it's like menthol or something else, but he preferred that. So he was not as drunk as many of their other victims. But this was not going to deter them. Now, Jamie was strong and he did fight back, unlike most of the victims. But unfortunately, both Burke and Hare, they were able to overpower them. They then stripped his body and the few possessions that he had were stolen. So that was his snuff box and also his spoon that he would use for the snuff. So they head to take the body of Jamie to Knox, and when they get there, many of Knox's students recognise Jamie straight away. Like I said, he's a very familiar figure in the streets of Edinburgh, so they knew exactly who it was. Now, when it started to circulate that Jamie was missing and people were looking for him, Knox went ahead and dissected his body ahead of some of the others that he already had. Now, before the dissection, he removed Jamie's hands and Jamie's head. I wonder why. Now, the pair went on to kill their final victim on the 31st of October 1828. This was a woman named Margaret Docherty. Now, Margaret was a middle-aged Irish woman. Burke was able to lure Margaret into the lodging house, stating that he also has Irish relatives with the surname Docherty, so they had a lot to talk about. Now, they're chatting away and Burke decides that he's going to go out and get more whiskey. So he actually leaves Margaret with Helen McDougall. Ugh, hate her. But also two other lodgers by the name of Anne and James Gray. Now, these other lodgers, they were an inconvenience to the men. Like, they could not get their work done with these lodgers around. So they actually go ahead and they pay Anne and James to go and stay at Hare's lodge for the night. And they done this under the pretenses that Margaret Docherty was a relative, so they just wanted some like alone time to catch up and stuff like that. So Anne and James obliged. Both Anne and James returned briefly to the lodging house around 9 p.m. because they had to collect clothing for their children. When they get in, they notice Burke Hare and their wives are all singing, dancing, having a good time. What they didn't know was that Burke and Hare had murdered Margaret Docherty and put her in a pile of straw at the bottom of the bed. She was under the straw pile. So the next day, the Greys return and Anne becomes very, very suspicious because Burke will not let her approach the end of the bed near the straw pile, which is where she had left her stockings. So she kind of like complies with it. She doesn't go near it. However, later that evening when she gets the chance, she goes to search through the straw. Now, when she had searched through the straw, she found Docherty, and on her face was like a load of saliva and a whole lot of blood. Now, on their way to the police, they actually ran into Hare, and Hare tried to bribe them and say that he would pay them £10 a week if they would not tell the police. But they point blank refused. Thank God, like someone with a bit of heart, they refused to accept the money and headed straight for the police. Now, Burke and Hare have the absolute cheek. They still continue to take Margaret's body to Knox to get their payment. Now, when they were questioned, Burke and his wife had said that Margaret Docherty had left the house, but they gave different departure times for her. Get your story straight. Now, early the next morning, the police decide that they're going to go to Knox's dissecting room and have a look and see what they can find. What do they find? Margaret Docherty's body. Yep, and James was able to identify her as the woman that he had seen with Burke and Hare. So Hare and his wife was arrested that same day, along with Brogan, who was Burke's cousin, you know, that other place that they were staying and lodging. However, all three of them denied any knowledge of the events. Funny that. Now, in total, 16 people had been murdered by Burke and Hare. So the trial began on Christmas Eve at 10 a.m. The trial was held before the High Court of Justiciary, and this was in Edinburgh's Parliament House. Now, in the early afternoon, both Burke and Helen had pleaded not guilty to the murder of Docherty. Then there was a list of 55 witnesses, which included Hare and Knox. Obviously, with a list of 55 witnesses, not everyone was called to the stand, and Knox and his three assistants weren't actually questioned in court, which is so annoying because, I'm sorry, but Knox is probably the best guy to give a statement. Now, luckily, one of Knox's assistants, David Patterson, he was called to the stand. He was actually the one who primarily dealt with Burke and Hare when they were dropping off the bodies, so they were able to confirm that Burke and Hare had dropped off several corpses to Robert Knox. So in the early evening, Hare, he had taken the stand to give his own sort of like statement, and he had said that Burke was the sole murderer. However, his wife Helen had been sort of involved in luring Margaret Docherty back to the house. Now, Hare also stated that at one point Margaret Docherty had tried to escape the house and Helen was the one who brought her back in. Hare did state that he was involved in bringing the corpses to Knox, but he was not involved in the murders. Now, after Hare's questioning, his wife entered the witness box and she was carrying their baby, who at the time I think had like whooping cough or something like that. And with the baby's coughing, she was using this as time to think about like her answers and carefully, you know, let it resonate, let it sit there, and then she'd give the answer to the question. But, you know, I don't know what she was playing at. And she was like, you know, I just have such poor memory and I can't really remember much. I'm sure you can't remember locking the door, Margaret. Now, the final prosecution witnesses to be called were two doctors by the name of Black and Christensen. Now, they had said that they did suspect foul play, but that there was no hard evidence of it being a murder. Because remember, they had their own method that was quite ingenious back then. This method would go on to be named burking, after Burke and Hare. The jury retired to consider the verdict on Christmas Day around 8:30 a.m. and they returned 50 minutes later. Now, I'm sorry, if that was me, if I was that jury and it was Christmas Day, that's like my favourite day of the year, I would be like, right, let's make it snappy. They're guilty, let's go. So they did deliver the guilty verdict against Burke for the murder of Margaret Docherty, and the same charge that they were holding against Helen McDougall, they found not proven, so she gets off. Now, Burke was given the death sentence by Judge Boyle, and as he passed the sentence to Burke, he said the following: "Your body should be publicly dissected and anatomised, and I trust that if it is ever customary to preserve skeletons, yours will be preserved, in order that posterity may keep in remembrance your atrocious crimes." So McDougall was released at the end of the trial and she returned home, but the people of Edinburgh were not accepting of her coming back into society, as you would expect. They were absolutely furious with her involvement in these crimes and they had no doubt that she was guilty. Now, McDougall, on the back of this, soon fled from Edinburgh and her later whereabouts is unknown. So that is all we know about her. Then on the 28th of January 1829, Burke was hanged in front of a crowd of 25,000 people. Yeah. Then on the 1st of February, so quite a quick turnaround, Burke's corpse was publicly dissected. Once the public dissection had finished, his skeleton was then given to the Anatomical Museum of Edinburgh's Medical School, and as of 2024, still remains there on display. Now, his death mask and also a book is said to be bound by tanned skin and is on display at the Surgeons' Hall Museum. Then on the 5th of February 1829, Hare was released and he was basically told, you know, you're not going to be accepted back in Edinburgh, so you should really make other arrangements. So he fled to Dumfries, but he was recognised in Dumfries and this resulted in like multiple attacks against him. Like, that man was not going to live a quiet life. So the police had like taken him into protective custody. They had basically advised him like, you should head for the English border throughout the night. So nightfall comes and Hare heads off into the darkness to live his free life, and the rest about him is also unknown. So that is the end of this true crime and makeup video, the case of Burke and Hare. I hope you enjoyed this one. I hope you found it interesting. I honestly like Scottish history sometimes is rather fascinating. So I'm so happy you enjoyed the Scottish videos. So I decided to do this one as like kind of like the final one for a little while, because I feel like I'm going OTT with the Scottish cases because you seem to enjoy them so much. But don't forget to request down below what cases you would like to see next from me. If it is a Scottish case, still request it, because if you want them, I'll provide them. I'm happy to do so. You can leave them in the comments below, or you can send it via email, which I'll pop up on the screen now for you. My social media handles will also be linked down below, so that's my TikTok and my Instagram. But ultimately, please just make sure you subscribe to my channel, put the notification bell on so you don't miss when I upload, which is 2 to 3 times per week. If you're interested in any of the products used on my face today, they will also be linked down below as well. All the different links, if you want to shop them, you can. They're not affiliate, but I just think it's good to link them in case you want anything. But I really hope you enjoyed this true crime and makeup episode, and until the next one, I will see you later. Bye.